Ruth, this schema is quite a big one. It's so big, in fact, we're not only going to do 7 minutes on this one, we're going to do 14 minutes on this particular schema, but in 2 parts. And this is quite a common schema, isn't it? So we're talking about emotional deprivation. I'm Rita Younan, clinical psychologist, advanced schema therapist, supervisor trainer.
And I'm Ruth Holt. We're working our way through all of the 18 maladaptive schemas as part of schema therapy. And today, we are talking about emotional deprivation. It's really a sense of not being seen. Could be not being seen in a few different ways. It can be 3 core ways. So it can be a deprivation of nurture. So really not having the attention, affection, warmth, connection that every child, every human needs, and a deprivation of nurture, a deprivation of empathy. So not really having been felt, been seen in a way that is a kind of a deep sense of care and connection. Being understood, I guess, would be a good way to say that one. And the third one can be a deprivation of protection. So not having had somebody solid and stable who will direct, guide, provide the safety that we need in the world. So emotional deprivation is complex, but it's also probably the most common schema. In fact, you could say it's a kind of human condition schema that we are often not seen in the way we need to be, but typically clients with this schema have a really deep sense of this.
Good point about the fact that it is really common, because sometimes people will have this schema who've come from really good families where, parents meant really well, but, we came from the era where, physical needs were prioritized over emotional needs. And it's, in recent time where we're starting to kind of realize the real importance of being emotionally attuned to and how that helps us become, really stable, well-adjusted adults later in life. But really being mindful of which aspect of the emotional deprivation was more relevant in those early experiences. I recall a patient of mine who, had strength and guidance and some understanding, but the thing that really got to her was the lack of affection, the lack of touch, and not being in a relationship really just brought that to the core constantly, and it was really quite painful. And in fact, Ruth, as I'm saying that, I'm just wondering how that plays out in some of the couples work that you, emotional deprivation that you do.
I think, one of the big ones that actually is very common when I'm working with couples is, there's always a difference in desire levels that, often with couples, you'll have one partner who's a higher desire partner and one who's the lower desire partner. And I think for a lot of men in our culture, they have been deprived often of touch and warmth, and perhaps they've really directed a lot of those needs, into sex. And so whilst there might just be different desire levels, sometimes there's an emotional deprivation schema driving that really strong demand and need for sex, because that's the only way that that person has learnt to receive nurture. And so it's really important for us to start to tease that apart and work out what that's all about. And also, I guess, another way it can present in couples is that you can typically have a more emotionally deprived person who's highly attracted to an emotionally inhibited person. So you can sense, in that situation, a person who really needs a lot of that connection, they've kind of found another person who's actually going to meet the schema and say, yeah, you don't really need that, and I don't do emotions, or I don't, you're too needy for me, and will pull away, which of course will then encourage that emotionally deprived partner to often pursue, and they will get really distressed, really needy, and the more they do that, the more their partner thinks, exactly, that's why I don't want to have those conversations. I don't want all that need coming in my direction, and so the cycle perpetuates.
Providing kind of individual therapy, you might see those 2 people back to back. So you might see the person with the emotional deprivation that presents as more anxious and needy, and you kind of refer to it like a leaky bucket that never seems to get full no matter what happens. And then you've got somebody who has the same schema but are quite dismissive of the fact that they even have emotional needs, and it doesn't bother them. But they're in therapy, something's not quite right, but it has nothing to do with that. And then it becomes about this lack of connection in their early experiences.
Yeah, so sometimes you have to do a bit of convincing, for the avoidant, more detached clients. they actually can often say, well, some people need that, I don't need that. But what we know is we are humans, we all need connection. But often these clients have been taught, particularly maybe more narcissistic clients or self-aggrandizing clients, or just very detached cerebral kind of clients. They've learnt to shut that off. And so part of the early work of treatment is really starting to get them in touch with that need, get them in touch with that little lonely or distressed child who hasn't ever been seen. And that's where imagery, I think, can be such a powerful thing, particularly in the early stages, to start to connect clients up with those needs.
And it's not about what happened, it's about what didn't happen, and it's about fulfilling the need of what didn't happen. And Chris Lee, who's done a lot of research on imagery scripting and EMDR, talks about the fact that when it comes to emotional deprivation, that rescripting is probably a better intervention than, say, EMDR.
Yeah, because we really need to model and give clients a felt experience of somebody seeing their particular need, whether it's warmth, whether it's connection, whether it's protection. And I think also for our clients maybe who exhibit this as more of a anxious, needy, won't let you leave the room kind of presentation, that they are desperate for more and more of you, that is also a really good indicator of emotional deprivation. And often we can, become a bit avoidant or a bit critical of that as clinicians, because we might feel a bit activated. We might feel like the life's going to get sucked out of us. But actually what we really need to do in those early stages of therapy is start to notice that, to catch it, to say, I'm wondering if that's that little anxious, distressed child who's not been seen. And so there's a side of you that's saying, well, she needs to see me for 2 hours and she needs to talk to me every day on the phone. And if she never does that, then she doesn't really care. And we need to start to kind of set some boundaries and limits and start to reframe that as a schema that they've learned, as a leaky bucket. And we need to start helping them patch the holes so that it's not just more and more, but starting to learn to hold on to that love and connection and not let it just go out the bottom of the bucket. Well, Rita, that's the first in our part 2 series on emotional deprivation. That's 7 minutes. And we look forward to talking to you next time about more of the more in-depth kind of treatment techniques we're going to use to work to hopefully heal this schema with our clients.